Most towns have a United Church of Christ somewhere in the village. And a few years ago, all of those churches put up new signage. And the sign said, "Don't put a period where God has put a comma. God is still speaking." Which is exactly the message of the readings today. God's not done revealing things to us. God is still speaking. You might hear God's voice this very day. And if today you hear God's voice, let's hope that our hearts are not too hard. God is speaking. It's great news, right? Well, that means God might have something to say to us that we may not want to hear. Here's the rub. We think that we want God to have total authority over our lives. We tell ourselves that we want that. But then when we start to think about it, we realize maybe we don't. If we really said, "Okay, God, I surrender, it's all up to you now," then God would take the wheel and we wouldn't have control over where we went. Do we really want that to happen? I mean, it's okay for God to have control over some things, but do we want God telling us, "I think you're too comfortable. I think it's time to quit your job and take a risk"? Do we want God telling us how we should be dating or what our romance life should be like or about marriage? Do we want God telling us how to raise our kids? So what most of us do is make two lists. A list of the things that we want God to have control over, and then the hands-off list. There's so many examples of this, so I'll go first. Last week I was on vacation, and it was wonderful. I loved it. I don't know if you've noticed this, but Pope Francis doesn't ever go on vacation. He never goes on vacation. I don't know if he doesn't believe in it, but he doesn't go. All the other popes went. There's actually a vacation house for popes in the hills outside of Rome where it's cooler because it's so hot there in the summer. But he doesn't go there. He doesn't take vacation. Now, I, on the other hand, take all of my vacation. And a week of retreat. And a week of professional development every year. And I love it. I look forward to it. It refreshes me. But what if I gave God complete control of my life? And then God said, "This year, I want you to only take half of your vacation." I would quickly remind God that vacation is one of those items on the off-limits list. But isn't that exactly what we do? We give God restricted control to our lives. It's almost like we hand God the keys to our life, and it's a big keychain, kind of like the keychain I got when I started here as the pastor. And I could not believe all the keys, and I thought, could I possibly be in charge of all this stuff? But when we give God the key ring, there's a lot of things on that ring that God can get into. We give God quite a bit of access. God can go into the basement of our life. God can go up into the attic. We give God access to some of the closets. But there's one key that we don't put on the ring, the master key. We keep that for ourselves. God has a pretty fat ring with a lot of keys, but not the master key. Because if God got the master key, we would lose too much control. It's too big a risk. For many human beings, the only way that we give God the master key is if our life completely falls apart. And so many of us, at some point in life, have been there, where we just can't figure it out anymore. Everything's going wrong. We're in a disaster. And that's when we say, "Okay, God, here's the master key. Please fix all this. I don't know what to do." That is why in the 12 steps, the very first step is to admit that our lives are unmanageable. And we say to God, "I can't do this. You're going to have to do this. I can't do it." So actually, our lives falling apart in the big picture can be a blessing. It can be exactly what motivates us to let God take the controls. I once saw a bumper sticker that said, "God is my co-pilot." And I mentioned that to my friend Kathy I said, have you ever seen that bumper sticker that says, God is my co-pilot? And she said, if God is your co-pilot, you might want to trade seats. Isn't that true? Imagine us telling God, you can be in charge of taxiing, and when we're at our cruising altitude, I'll let you sit at the wheel for a while. But I'm going to handle takeoff. I'm in charge of landing. Why would we do that? Doesn't God know more about takeoff and landing than we do? Shouldn't we be giving God a little more access than co-pilot? So this week, the scriptures are introducing us to this idea that we need to figure out how to make the one list out of the two lists. How can we stop saying, God, here's the stuff that's off limits, and give it all to God? In the second reading, we heard about being divided. We're divided because there's a lot of things that we're concerned about. There's a lot of things in our life that we're interested in. And so we divide between this is for God and this is for me. But we heard in the gospel that when Jesus spoke, everyone listened. They rearranged their whole lives. Demons fled when Jesus spoke. And God is still speaking. So, it's important for us to recognize that if we want God's authority to reign in our life, if we want to be able to reach our potential, we need to listen and to let God have the access. So a good question is, where does God's authority enter your life? Where's the doorway that you've opened so that God's authority can work on you? Is it in a homily like this? Could this homily be a way that God's authority could get to you? Could it be listening to the scriptures? Will it happen during the Eucharist today when you receive the body and blood of Jesus? Will you allow that authority to enter you too? The virtue that we are being called to work on is obedience. This is the virtue needed in order to give God total authority. And we're not good at that, especially in our culture. Americans are not good at obedience. We're individualists. We don't like obedience. But of course, our truest identity is not our culture or our nationality. It is that we are children of God, and that only our Maker knows how we can reach our potential. So if we are not yet brave enough to give God the master key, how can we move in the direction of that? How many more keys could we give God? If we're not ready to give God the master key, what other keys could we put on the ring so that we are at least moving in the direction of giving God more authority in our lives? You know, when the day comes that our lives fall apart, God forbid, but we know that most people have a day. When that day comes, we're going to give God the master key. We're going to just hand it over. So why wait till then? Why not do it earlier so that we're better prepared? God is still speaking. This very day we may hear God's voice. May we be open to whatever that voice tells us and obedient to that authority.